Welcome to Life Beyond Abortion, the podcast where we delve into the untold stories and experiences surrounding abortion. Stories often missing from everyday conversations, media reports, and even other podcast interviews. I'm your host, Melissa Oden, the founder and CEO of the Abortion Survivors Network. As the author of You Carried Me, A Daughter's Memoir, and Abortion Survivors Break Their Silence, I've had the privilege of hearing the most powerful stories from some of the most resilient and courageous individuals. These stories and these people have profoundly transformed my life, and I believe they have the power to transform yours as well. Together, we will amplify these voices, share the truths that they illuminate, and challenge our culture to recognize what life is truly like beyond abortion. Today, I am joined by Mary Szoch of the Family Research Council. Mary, I just thank you ahead of time for your time and your insight that you're going to share with us.
Oh, it's such an honor to be here with you today, Melissa. Thanks for having me.
Well, and I think, I want to kind of cue this up to help people understand as we share the stories and the voices beyond abortion. Yes, we want the people who have experiences to be amplified, but I also want the truth of professionals like you to be heard in our culture, Mary. So let's just sort of start there. What's your background? How did you get involved in the life issue? What's your role at FRC?
Yeah, so I am a lifelong pro-lifer. My dad had my brother, my sister, and I out handing out flyers before elections, talking about who pro-life candidates were, doing collections for the March for Life, attending the March for Life, going to Life Chains, from the time I was in diapers. And so I grew up surrounded by the pro-life movement. My older sister has a chromosomal abnormality, and she is very blessed to have been born into a family that recognizes the dignity and worth of every human being and for whom abortion was never an option. And we are so very blessed to have her. So having her in my life has definitely shaped a lot of my thought around the life issue. Following college, I taught for 5 years. And while I was teaching, one of the parents of one of my students said, hey, did you ever think about doing like pro-life policy or something? Which I always say is a very nice way of saying, you have talents, but it's not teaching. Well, and so I moved from there to being the director of life issues for the Archdiocese of Washington. And that was my first taste of politics and public policy, and worked with the DC Catholic Conference, and then moved over to Family Research Council, where now I direct our Center for Human Dignity, and we do we work on public policy surrounding the dignity of every human life.
And you are one of those voices in this conversation about particularly born alive infants and abortion survivors that I have always had such admiration and respect for. You know your stuff, Mary, to put it very bluntly. You know this issue far better than most professionals I know. So I would love for you to just sort of break this down for us. What has been the status of born alive protections? Why is this an issue or a need? We are told in our culture this doesn't happen, first of all, and so therefore these policies aren't needed. And P.S., there are different state laws that already make sure that this legislation isn't needed. So break it down in layman's terms. What's been going on and what's going on right now?
So I'm sure most listeners saw during the last election, both President Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance brought up the issue of babies being born alive after abortion. And President Trump in particular was smacked down by the moderator who said, there is no place in America where it is legal to kill a baby after it's born. That's just not true. There certainly there are laws against infanticide, but it is not illegal for an abortionist to leave a baby who on the table to die from the cuts, the burns, the heart attack, whatever it was that abortionist inflicted upon that child. It's not illegal in many states to do that. In fact, we have 12 states in this country where a baby born alive following an abortion has absolutely no protections in law. And we have three more states, Illinois, New York, and Minnesota, where thankfully not our vice president, the vice president candidate, Tim Walz, he was governor, and he signed into law a repeal of protections for babies who are born alive following an abortion. So this idea that born children, I'm sorry, I keep saying unborn because it's so absurd to think that we have moved into this realm, but of born babies who have just survived a horrific attack on their life by an abortionist, the idea that they're protected in law federally is just not true, and it's not true at the state level either. In 2002, Congress did pass the Born Alive Protection Act, and this act was a definitional change that said, well, if you survive an abortion, you are a person. But this definitional change had no enforcement mechanism, and despite 277 reported cases from just 10 states of babies being born alive following an abortion, there's never been a single federal prosecution under this act. So we're desperately in need of a law at the federal level. The Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act would be that law that set mandates that whomever is present, whatever type of healthcare worker is present, or rather, whether it be the abortionist or someone else, that they provide immediate care for that baby, that baby be transported to a hospital so that they're not at the hands of the person who was minutes earlier trying to kill them, and that these cases be reported, and that the abortionists be held accountable for these.
Yeah, it's common sense, right? I mean, I think this is hard for people to wrestle with because once you start to accept any of those needs that you've laid out, Mary, then people have to start to realize, oh my goodness, like how you have to start begging the question, how often does this happen? And what has happened to these babies over the years? And why are they not reporting it? And we know then the slippery slope leads right down to, oh my gosh, they were always a baby. And what's the difference between the baby who survived the abortion and the baby minutes before that in utero? If we expect that baby to be cared for, why would we be trying to kill them in the womb?
Yeah, and that's the part that most people can't grapple with. You know, here in DC, a few years ago, we had the case of the DC Five, which were five babies who were found from Cesare Santangelo's abortion business, and they were fully intact, and these babies were fully developed. Most of them all five of them looked as if they could survive outside the womb. And the injuries that these babies sustained suggested that they were killed either through partial birth abortion, which is a federal crime, or through infanticide. Yet, the DC Health Department recommended, they did nothing to investigate this. And instead, they actually put the activist, the pro-life activist who found these babies in jail instead and charged her with conspiracy and under the FACE Act. Thankfully, President Trump pardoned her. But the Biden administration actually recommended that the DC Health Department destroy these babies without autopsies. They're so afraid to face the evil of what they have done that they recommended these babies be destroyed. And that's what the left wants.
And that's so hard for me as a survivor, and it always has been. I've laid hands on abortion clinics that have closed. I have been there at the funerals of aborted babies, and I can be strong and bold and go before Congress and all those things, but I can tell you, Mary, those are the moments that break me because that could have been me, right? I could have been one of the DC 5 and my life mattered just like their lives matter. And we all know a baby that we right know and love who maybe was quote unquote unwanted at some point by someone, but then you see them and you see their humanity and you want to provide love and care for them. We wouldn't just leave them to be incinerated, their bodies, right, so inhumanely treated. This is not how we as a country treat the most vulnerable.
No, it isn't. And that's something that we need to grapple with. We're seeing with mifepristone, the abortion drug, really taking over the way that abortion is done. We see that abortion has become much more of an impulse decision. That it's much different to just pop a pill than it is to actually go in for a surgical procedure. And so many women are having abortions and immediately recognizing what they have done. And thankfully, there is the abortion pill reversal process that can occur and can save some of these babies' lives. But for many of these women, they end up delivering their fully recognizable baby into the toilet. And Planned Parenthood's lie that this was just a clump of cells leaves them devastated and wondering what in the world they have done.
Yeah, and I'm sure you've experienced just like I have, when Roe was overturned, we saw that sort of immediate effect of abortion drugs being so readily accessible and of course pushed during COVID times. And so then pregnancy centers were receiving all these phone calls from women saying, I've now passed this baby's body in my home. I wasn't expecting this. I'm hurting. I don't know what to do with it.
Yeah, and we're going to have to unpack that for decades. We have become a nation of wounded mothers who are dealing with the death of their unborn baby, and this is tragic, and it makes the discourse surrounding abortion so difficult to have because you're dealing with people who have not received, who have not recognized that they can receive God's mercy and His healing love, and that wound is so deep because they lost a baby. Because as your survival story proves to everyone, that unborn child in the womb is no different from you or me, other than he or she is younger.
One of the most common arguments that I hear, and I could do a whole podcast about this, Mary. I mean, you could do a whole podcast about it as well. Of, the fact that you're alive, Melissa, and you serve abortion survivors. You throw out all these numbers of the people that you serve. I mean, doesn't that just tell us that yes, babies survive abortions, but they're provided medical care? What's the big deal?
We only have 10 states that require reporting on the number of babies born alive after an abortion. And that reporting relies on the good faith of an abortionist who was paid to produce a dead baby. And with just those 10 states, we have 277 cases reported of babies born alive. And we don't know what happens to those babies. We don't know how many others were not reported alive. How many were just shoved in a closet? How many were left to die on a table from wounds inflicted by the abortionist? If the abortionist is being paid to produce a dead child, what is going to stop him from doing that 2 seconds earlier, or from doing that inside the womb, or 2 seconds later when that baby's outside the womb? Nothing. We need this legislation.
Yeah, I often have said, even to members of Congress, my life shouldn't have been left in the hands of whoever was working that day at the hospital. And, I truly believe if my birth mother's abortion would have taken place at Planned Parenthood and not a hospital, I wouldn't have lived to tell the story. That's one of those factors of how I've survived. It doesn't mean that I was protected. It simply means somebody did the right thing that day.
And it shouldn't be left up to that. It shouldn't be that we're relying on an industry that is paid to kill people to be the ones to do the right thing.
Yeah, that story that Sarah Zagorski shared when we were together for the family caucus event. Sarah Zagorski survived an abortion induced labor at about 26 weeks in Louisiana. And her mom was very much someone who is vulnerable to the abortion industry. And her mom, in that state of duress, an abortion baby is born alive. The abortionist saying to her, right, this baby's going to be a vegetable. You don't want to have it. And this mother, in a state of duress, had to fight the abortionist for her child to be provided medical care. Who in our world would say that that is the right thing for women?
Not me. Absolutely, absolutely no one with a conscience, right? That when a woman goes into an abortion clinic, she is vulnerable in all sorts of ways, right? She's likely there because of fear of the future, and then she is laying there on the table with who's a person who is supposed to be a physician in front of her, ready to kill her unborn child. I mean, to put women in that position where they are the ones who have to fight back, without any legislation to back them, we're asking an awful lot.
Well, and isn't that an important point that you're making, Mary? Which is, we're sort of painted as, these bills are being introduced to restrict women's reproductive rights. It's about abortion. But yet we're the ones who are saying, first of all, it is about protecting this vulnerable baby who has already suffered so much. But it's also wanting to ensure that these mothers are protected as well.
Yes, and that's the thing with the abortion industry. They're ready to exploit women in any way that they possibly can. The second that a woman recognizes the humanity of her unborn baby, and the second that she changes her mind, she should be able to do something about it. And unfortunately, we do reach a point where those unborn babies have been killed. But if that baby is still alive, that mother should be able to fight for her child's life, and she should have legislation that's there to back her.
And you personally have an example with this. This is one of the things that I love about you is your heart, and that you, yes, as a professional, know this in and out, but you also live it out personally. And I'm wondering if you could share a little bit about a woman who is very vulnerable to the abortion industry and was someone impacted by an abortion that she was able to stop, which people don't often think about that as well, of the fact that, yes, some women stop their abortions. And when you do that, the baby may be born right away or later, right? Weeks or months later.
Right. And in this case, thank goodness, a DC health worker got in touch with me. She said, "Hey, I'm not supposed to do this, but there's a mom who's 7.5 months pregnant, and she has applied to us to fund her abortion at Cesare Sant'Angelo's abortion business." And she said, "Listen, I'm pro-choice, but what that man's doing is not an abortion. This is murder." And this mom has said that I could look, that the healthcare worker could look for families who would be willing to adopt her baby. And she asked if I could help. So I talked to the girl the next day, and I asked her, what do you want for your baby? What are you looking for? And she said, he doesn't need much. I just would like my baby to have a good home and live in a good school district and, maybe have a bed. And that part really hit me, that her goal was for her baby to have a bed. And I told her what a great mom she was, and she said, I really don't want to have an abortion, but I've gone through abusive relationships. I have mental health issues. I have a history of being abused by family members. The list went on and on of the tragedies that this woman had gone through, and she said, "I'm just getting my life back on my feet." and I'm afraid that having this baby will set me back. And I said, well, there are lots of people out there to help you. And she said, I am going to go to the abortionist just to get some information. And so we made plans to meet the next day. Um, I had called around to see, would there be any pro-life families in the area who would be willing to adopt this baby? And within an hour, there were at least 5 families who were willing to do so. And they were willing to do so with no questions asked. The young woman and I were scheduled to meet for lunch the next day, but that never happened. And instead, I got a call from her caseworker who said, she has started the abortion process. And so we prayed, and later we were connected with the mom who was in terrible pain. She was bleeding, and she had been sent home from the abortion clinic. And she said, I don't want to abort this baby. The abortionist had already started the abortion, and because I knew how late-term abortions work, I imagined that her unborn child was likely already dead. But she was ushered to the hospital here in DC, and on the way there, she had tried to call the abortionist to see what she should do if she wanted to stop the process or because of the excruciating pain she was in. And he actually refused to take her call at that point. So she got to the hospital and she was in the emergency room, and she said, I don't want to abort this baby. And the number of times she was asked, are you sure about that? Is shocking to me. And she said, yes, she was certain. And so the emergency doctor removed the laminaria from her, which the steps in the late-term abortion process, first, the doctor will, if he's doing a legal late-term abortion, one of the ways they do it is they inject the baby's heart with digoxin to stop that baby's heart and to kill the child. And then they use laminaria to dilate the cervix, and then a few days later, the mom will deliver a dead baby. But at the emergency room, they found that this baby still had a heartbeat. So when they removed the laminaria, the mother had an extraordinary amount of bleeding, and the doctors had to work immediately to save her life because she was in danger of dying on that table. And minutes after that, her little boy was born. He was tiny, but he was beautiful and he was spunky, and she loved him immediately with all her heart. And thankfully, the doctors were able to save the mom's life as well. But the abortionist, Cesare Santangelo, the one who tried to kill that beautiful little baby boy, and who in doing so put his mother's life at risk, he has never been held accountable. And he is the same abortionist who was responsible for the DC-5.
I was hoping that you would draw attention to that. I wanted people to understand. That name sounds familiar.
He is an awful butcher here in DC, and he puts women's lives at risk daily.
As we close, Mary, I first of all want to thank you for what you did for that mother and for that abortion survivor, being there for them in a time of need, something the abortionist was absolutely unwilling to do. I mean, I thank God he didn't answer the phone because, we know what would have happened if he would have responded to that call, which is why Born Alive legislation is needed to ensure that it doesn't happen again. But as we close, could you just give folks maybe like 1 or 2 key points of where can they go to learn about Born Alive legislation and the current gaps? And, what's something tangible they can do right now regarding it?
Well, Family Research Council has a great resource on this. We actually have 2 great resources. The first is at frc.org/pro-life maps, and that's where you can see all of the pro-life laws across the country regarding abortion. And then further down, there's another map that shows you all of the laws around the country regarding infants born alive following an abortion. Our second resource is at frc.org/bornalive, and that is just a publication that details all of the issues with protecting babies, all the issues that we have protecting babies who are born alive following an abortion.
Thank you for sharing that. Mary, I just want to thank you for being there for that mom and for that abortion survivor in a time of great need. That's just it shouldn't be this way. But I thank you for being there for them and for all the professional work that you are doing on Born Alive. That PDF is a great example of what we like to refer to at the Abortion Survivors Network as well, for people to understand the scope of the problem. Folks, if you haven't visited FRC's website, please do so and learn more about Born Alive legislation. You know, Mary, I just want to thank you for joining me, and I want to thank you, the audience, for joining us for this episode of Life Beyond Abortion. Again, heartfelt thank you, Mary, for all that you are doing, and I know you'll continue to do on the issue of life.
Such an honor to work by you.
Thank you. I always love getting to see you in DC. You know, that abortion survivor and mom's story matters, because they matter first and foremost. Just like every survivor and every audience member, their life matters and their story matters as well. And these stories matter in the conversation about abortion. If you have been touched by what you've heard today, or maybe you've been challenged by what you've heard today, I encourage you to share this episode and help amplify the truth about life beyond abortion. Don't forget to subscribe, to rate, and review our podcast to help us spread the stories and the truths, transforming our culture one story and one truth at a time. For more information and to connect with our community at the Abortion Survivors Network, visit our website at abortionsurvivors.org and follow us on Instagram and Facebook at the Abortion Survivors Network and on X at ASN Official.
Life Beyond Abortion is a podcast presentation of the Herzog Foundation. The views and opinions on the show are those of the host and her guest, and not necessarily those of the Herzog Foundation. You can find out more about Melissa's work at melissaoden.com or by following her on Instagram at melissaoden. Be sure to like and subscribe to the show so that you never miss an episode of Life Beyond Abortion.